Well, hi everybody. Welcome to another show of Business Lunatics. I think we're on show 9 now. This is great. Good to have you on the show, Freddie and Rochelle. Today we're going to have a great conversation about finance, business finance. It's essentially what do you need to do to protect yourself? Number one, make sure you're paying your taxes and make sure that you are on top of your finances as far as what's going on. With that in mind, Freddie, why don't you take it? You had an interesting example today.
Yeah, one of the things that on my podcast, I actually recorded an episode today with a fractional CFO, and she shared some stories about some of her customers and some of the challenges that they had. But I'm going to share a story of a company that I worked with recently, and I was actually stepped in as general manager, and they were a husband and wife team. They had been in business for 30 years. They were doing about $1 million, give or take, per year in revenue. And they always had money in the bank. They traveled the world, they did their vacations and things like that. And unfortunately, he passed away, and we needed to take a look at what was happening financially as I took over as general manager. And the accountant that we had brought in was a younger guy, but he was basically a numbers guy. And he kept saying, this just doesn't add up. Something's wrong. Something's not categorized correctly and stuff like that. And I was working with a business coach that was originally working with the owner until he passed away. So he started working with me, and we would meet weekly. And I was always bring the P&L statement, and he just kept saying, it just doesn't add up. Something's wrong. And, that's not my area. I can do sales and stuff like that, but I do know, can read a P&L statement. Well, we ended up getting hired an HR agency to take over HR services because we didn't have it. And they offered financial services as well. So they took over the payroll. And when we did that, we had their CFO that was on part of their team take a look at the books, and they just weren't adding up. Things were improperly categorized. They had a car that was part of the books that really shouldn't have been part of the books. And it was a loan that they had used and it wasn't structured correctly in the books. And so we had to get the books fixed. We had to get a forensic, he happened to be a forensic CFO,
Oh,
go through, clean it up, had to go back 2 years prior to the year. So basically 3 years worth of going backwards, cleaning those books up. So it became very, very expensive because they had to go back and clean everything up so it would add up because the goal was to position the company for acquisition, which is what I did. I grew up by $1 million in a year, and then the company got acquired. But there was no chance of that happening until we got the financials cleaned up.
right. So what just out of curiosity, what was the problem? And was there one particular problem? I mean, is this just a cumulative that compounded over years?
It was a combination of things improperly classified. And the other biggest thing that they made mistakes is they were not invoicing in the proper periods. So,
Yeah.
they did the work and then they would invoice when they got to it. And so it wasn't timed correctly, so nothing could match up
Wow.
oh yeah, well, they didn't know, they knew what they knew, and that was it. And so I think the lesson really here is that, you need to really pay attention. If that's not your specialty, because most people start off in
Right.
a business and, they're doing QuickBooks or using some other deal, but that's not their gig. Their gig is whatever service they're doing or product that they're selling. They really should bring on a CPA, not even, at least periodically every quarter to go through and make sure that things are being cataloged correctly and structured correctly because you got tax liabilities that you got to think of, and there's a
Of
multitude of different
course.
things. So,
Yeah. I mean, this sounds very much so like a company that, I don't know, they probably had great cash flow and didn't think about the things that they needed to think
no,
about.
it's just it. They would
Um,
travel the world. They go on vacation, once a year for a couple of weeks. It was a lifestyle business, really. That's what it was.
I was just gonna say the same thing. This is a lifestyle business. That's all it was. It brought in a lot. It was a cash cow brought in a lot of money, and nobody thought about really managing the books the way they're supposed to. Late invoices, not caring about the taxes, or making sure that everything's organized the way it's supposed to. That's just amazing. Honestly, it's amazing.
Or an
Um,
outstanding invoices that were sitting there
right.
and
Wow.
carrying them over the years versus writing them off and get them off the books. They would carry them on
Right.
there. So that really skewed up all the numbers.
That's that's crazy. I mean, the one thing I was telling you guys before we started the show, I remember, going back 38 years ago, the first thing I did was get a CPA hired, but not just for 30 days, 90 days at a time or whatever, just full time, because I'm running invoices on a regular basis. Somebody's got to generate the invoices, somebody's got to send them out, whether it was by email or by mail way back when. Somebody's got to follow up on those invoices, make sure they're getting paid. And you got to organize the books, right? You need to know that you sold this service category, right? You sold this one, this one, this one. You need to know what your books look like. You know what your balance sheet looks like. And never mind the fact you got to pay your taxes.
Sure.
So, like this company, I'm on it curious. How did they pay their taxes?
They had somebody do the taxes, but they packaged it so that it would work. That's how they did it. So, instead
Right,
of going back in, they were just a tax person. So they just made the taxes work. They didn't fix the books.
right. Just enough to make sure the IRS doesn't come in and audit
Exactly.
them.
Exactly.
Padlocks the door.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But but
exactly.
but the other thing
So
that,
this
if
is
you
what I see in companies as well. Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on a couple of things. First of all,
Yeah,
numbers tell a story. If you go look at your numbers can be glory, glory, hallelujah. It's time to celebrate. We're doing great. Or, lady sings the blues. We're all sitting here sobbing. But you really got to know your numbers because they actually tell a story. The other thing is you've got to really scrutinize them because when I go into a company, very often I see that businesses pay a lot of attention in the product or service that's generating the least amount of revenue. And I'm like, what the hell's going on here? Because it's easy. Now they're not putting the attention and the focus on the stuff that's bringing in more revenue. And then even if you're looking at the revenue isn't king. Profit is king.
correct.
So very often they're running, I'm
yeah,
going to do $100. Like, where did you come up with that number? Because it's sexy. Let's look at is it profitable? Let's look at what do you need to charge in order for this to be profitable. And then I get into all the time, industry standard is. And my attitude is I don't care about industry standard. What's the result that you create? And can you really focus on the result and charge according to the result? That's a whole different ballgame. I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with that I've redone what they do, repackaged it, and literally doubled and if not tripled their prices. I said, this you
right,
want to give charity, you don't want to become a charity. So when
Correct.
it comes to finances, your numbers tell a story. Get clear on it. Get clear on what's profitable, not what's comfortable. And like run this as a business and not a hobby. Big difference.
Sure.
well, that hobby is what Freddie was just saying. This company is running like a lifestyle. I mean, a
Right.
lifestyle business is turns into a hobby. It's not you're not running a business in the terms of running a business, or like Freddie, you had mentioned, what ultimately this turned into how do we sell the business, right? You can't sell it if all of these finances aren't organized properly.
Correct.
So it's got to be organized. And if your exit strategy is to sell it, well, then you need to plan accordingly. You can't just willy-nilly your way through this. I mean, one of our clients that we currently have, it's a very large lifestyle business. They're $30 million plus. And I'm telling you, as much as they say they're doing EOS and all these other things, this is purely a lifestyle business for the guys at the very top. They're not really into this idea of what is it going to take for us to get rid of this company when time comes. And they're going to have a trouble. They're going to have trouble with that when eventually. It's just a matter of time.
Sure. Sure. And, like I mentioned earlier before we started recording, I had a guest today on the show that, runs a fractional CFO company.
Mhm.
And she shared a story about this company. She got brought in to take a look at the books and take them over, and she would meet with the sales individual, and he kept saying, "Yeah, we're doing great. We got sales. I got all these phone calls made and everything else." And so that was 1 month, and the numbers didn't change, and so she, and then the second month was the same thing. And so she started looking into it and says, okay, how many leads did we come in? How many were closed? So she started doing the math on, what was the activity. And when it came down push to shove, that person caved and admitted that he had fabricated all the numbers and all the phone calls and all the appointments. And it was found through looking at it from a financial perspective. Because she started
Right.
saying, okay, what's the ROI on the investment? What are we investment? How many leads did we come in? How many phone calls and how many of those closed? They can't have all come in and none of them have closed.
Right,
So,
exactly. Yeah.
and so that's another aspect, is if you're paying attention to your finances in the business, you can find out that there's some things that are not working as they should be working.
Right. I mean, a good example I'll give you both is, as a marketing agency, while the marketing activities that we do tend to have a higher um, profit margin for us because we can play around with the labor a little bit. When it comes to advertising, our margins are very thin there. We're having to pay Google, we're paying Facebook, we're paying Instagram, we're paying whatever publication to run the ads for our clients. Well, I'm just throwing out a number. It's, to Rochelle's point here, I could generate $100,000 on an advertising project, but we're only keeping 15 or $10,000, and I'm just rough estimating this here right
Mm-hmm.
now, right? Well, guess what? $85,000 is going to the services that we have to pay. If you don't know that ahead of time, you're gonna you can't turn around and take the 100,000 and just assume that revenue is profit. It's not,
Right.
Not even
right,
close.
Rochelle?
Not even close. Not even close. You really have to look at what you're allocating your funds. A lot of people say, you know what? Let's just throw some sales at this. Sales will solve it. Maybe yes, maybe no. Sales may make an impact. It can bring in more revenue, but what kind of revenue and what's the revenue costing you? So again, a lot of people don't go down to the nitty gritty and get into what is the cost. They don't know two things. Number one, what's the cost um per new account. They don't understand what client acquisition costs. And the other thing that they don't know is they don't know the lifetime value of the account. So if
Right.
you're having a client,
Yeah.
if you have a client, I don't know, for 22 minutes and you're spending God knows how much money on it, it's not going to work in your best interest. But if you have an
Right.
account for 5 or 6 years, it's in your best interest to have, you could have a higher number on that client acquisition. But you know what? It's a numbers game, and you have to know which numbers do you want to pay attention to. That's going to be like the spokes, like it's like the nucleus. If I look at this particular thing will tell me the entire story. I don't have to look at
Hmm.
everything. This thing, if this particular number is healthy, we're doing okay. But if this
I
number
agree.
is peaked, whoa, we've got to really start looking. And you've got to look in different industries. What is that particular number? Is it your sales? Is it how many clients are you losing? You could be gaining 100 clients, let's say a year, and losing 90.
Right.
Hello. I had a client. I mean, he said, we gained so much. We did so great this month, but unfortunately, there's a lot of cancellations. What the heck's going on here? So there's a lot of you really need peripheral vision on this one. You can't just look at one thing. You've got to
No, no, not at all.
what
But
is
and you
what
bring,
is the thing that's driving the business that if you look at that, it's going to tell
yeah.
you the entire story.
And you bring up an interesting memory on my end. As you guys know, our company is based out of the Detroit metro area. And in 2009 and 2010, there was this crazy fiasco of a financial crisis that the entire country, let alone other countries as well. Anyway, one of the things that we learned from that experience was, and as of to and post that financial crisis, we no longer work with B2C companies. We focus on B2B. And if you ask me why, then the answer is this: B2C companies, we had huge advertising budgets. When that financial crisis happened and that axe came down, we were on the hook for the ad buys that we ran for our clients who did not pay because of the financial crisis, because they couldn't pay it because they weren't getting paid, blah, and it was just this trickle down effect.
It
And
snowballed.
it snowballed. I mean, it snowballed for everybody. I'm not blaming any one specific company or person on this, other than whoever started this mess. But when we did the analysis post, this whole crisis, we decided we're not doing business with B2Cs anymore. Our exposure is too great. Number one. Number two, here we are, 2000, and I'm just going to use this broadly, right? 2011 is when everybody started to come back out of that financial crisis. From 2011 to 2020, that's 9 years. 9 years later, you run into the pandemic, which is another crisis, which
Right.
effectively is a financial crisis in a different way. And the only good news I can tell you is that when the pandemic hit, we were perfectly prepared at this time around. Like the first time, okay, we had this huge exposure that we didn't count on. Second time around, yeah, no problems. And guess what? Part of it was the fact that we stopped doing business with B2C. And going to Rochelle's point, you need to do the analysis to figure out what is it that you need that's going to generate revenue. It's going to generate profits. What
Right.
is that? That's what you need to analyze.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's profit, not what the sales numbers were.
No,
I mean, you get
no.
caught up as like, wow, I made $1 million sale, how much I make out of it? Oh, I'm negative $5, not worth it.
Exactly. Right. You
No, no,
can't
the
work through
type
that.
of clients
And
you
it
go
goes
in.
further than that, and that's I had another individual on my show, and it talked about, you know, the sales guy at that place, the owner of the company said, what's your goal? And the guy says, oh, I'm looking for $1 million sale. And everybody clapped and everybody's all excited, according to the story. And this CFO says, well, do we have the throughput to handle that order? Do we
Mhm.
have the products? Do we have the fulfillment? Can we fulfill it? And when they looked at all the numbers,
Couldn't do it.
that $1 million sale would have screwed up the whole business because they had no ability to handle that workflow.
It bankrupted them.
And it would have been a
Bankrupt.
complete disaster because they wouldn't have been able to, it would have been a multitude, as he
Yeah.
explained it, multifaceted disaster, because it would have slowed them down from delivering the active projects that they had going, wouldn't have been able to fulfill and get started on a new project. So it would have screwed up a multitude of projects because they didn't have the bandwidth to handle that order at that time, and they didn't have any infrastructure to handle that type of an order.
I mean, I have two examples on that. Number one, I worked with a bed bug company about 8 or 9 years ago. And at the time, New York had this major infestation of bed bugs. Don't even ask what was going on. So
Okay.
he was getting more business than he knew what to do with. So what did he have to do? And this guy was really bold, and I give him credit. He hired overnight 60 new people, 6
Okay.
trucks. He was a massive expansion, massive. But he knew that he had the clientele literally waiting at the door for him to be able to take that level of to take on that level
Risk.
of volume. He could have
Yeah.
not taken on the volume had he not really did a major hire. And it worked out really, really well for him. So you got to recognize, like, where's that opportunity? Are you ready to take on that kind of payroll? You know, are you brave enough to say, I'm going to go for it? Let's finance this. This is a huge opportunity, because you've got to read your market, like what's available right then. So I give him credit. He did incredibly well. So you got to be careful, like where are you putting, and then who's paying for what right now? You know, what somebody
Right.
bought 5 years ago is not what somebody's buying today. You've got to really look at what is moving off the shelves, and can we innovate? You know, something that sold 5 years ago is not your bestseller anymore. And a lot of companies that I've worked with, they become very stale. They're like, well, it used to work. And I said, what does that have to do with it?
I agree. I
Yeah,
mean,
because companies don't
uh,
pivot. Sometimes they don't pivot. This has been
no.
working and we're going to stay this way because this is what we've done and this is the way we've always done it. Well, guess what? You look around and you're by
You're
yourself
out of
because
business.
everybody else is gone.
You're out
Yep.
of business. So you've
But
got to,
Rochelle, the example that you're giving though is the ability to have investment dollars to take on these types of opportunities, right? But in order to have investment dollars, you need to um, take a percentage of your profits and put it aside, right? And that's also, I mean, let's face it, this is business
well, that's
financial
part of
planning.
it. But again, I mean, you normally, your best relationship in a business when it's growing like that is your bank. You know, the bank, and if you can,
Sure,
the,
absolutely.
Hmm?
but you need a history with your bank. They're not going to just write you a check and whatever. You need to, like, say, like you said, you start your business, on one end is your accountant, on the other end is your banker. So you want to know what.
Hmm.
Now, here's the key: it's not the money, it's the mindset. It's
Hmm.
absolutely not the money. I'm working with somebody now that if you put an Uzi to his head, he cannot make a decision. He can't. Like, he can't. He's petrified, literally. It's not even. I mean, the Lord's Prayer is not going to help him. He can't do it. He's just so
That's
like.
crazy.
Now, this is a guy that literally had the most amazing mindset. And he said, I'm brave enough. I'm going to take this on. I'm going to hire 60 people. When you tell somebody to take on payroll like that, they can't
Yeah.
breathe. They
Yep.
can't breathe. And he's like, let's go for it. But it was very systematized. This is the
Yeah.
product. This is the audience. This is the opportunity that we're talking about. You're not taking on that kind of payroll for an opportunity of $42,000. You're taking on that
Yeah.
kind of
Right.
payroll for an opportunity of 4 to 5 million. But when you
Yep.
break it down and you have the finances and you have the marketing and you have the bank and you have the balls, you've got a home run. But a
Oh,
lot of
Yep.
absolutely.
people,
But I
there's an
want to,
area there that people get stuck. They're just too frightened to really move like that. They don't know how to move money.
sure. But
No,
I want to reemphasize that you talk about the bank. But again, if his books were not properly kept and messed up, there's zero
Nothing would
chance he
happen.
would have got any money.
I
It
agree.
would
100%.
have closed him down. No,
Yeah.
Yep.
no,
The,
absolutely. He had a really, I have to give him credit. He had a ruthless CFO. Ruthless. I mean, that guy went after when you talk about he would always say, you know, when people were delayed in payment, he says, I'm not, do I look like Citibank? Did you see the word Citibank on my business card? It's not happening. And he said, you know, after X amount of days, it's it goes automatically on credit card, or we will have to close your account. He says, this is not Citibank over here. So
right.
you
Yep.
got to get really ruthless with your payment. I had
Or
an
I mean,
account that wasn't ruthless. She did a lot. She was very into the sexy business. She was a jeweler and she had a really big account with Bloomingdale's. Bloomingdale's almost bankrupted her. So you got to be really careful who you do business with. What are their terms? Can you meet those terms? Can they meet your terms and move forward? Because some of these retail stores are unbelievable. A lot of people do business with Walmart and they get bankrupted because
Sure.
Walmart
correct.
requires such a small margin, a profit margin, and they make their money on volume. But if they screw
Yep.
up the volume, if you don't sell, a million dozen t-shirts, you're not going to make any money.
Yep.
Right.
That's
You already
exactly true.
manufactured the t-shirts. So now what are you going to do? So you got to
Yeah.
get really clear. Who's your ideal client? What are the terms? Are they favorable for you? And if not, then you have to say no, thank you, and not get caught up in this. Oh my God, I'm doing business with Bloomingdale's, or oh my God, I'm doing business with, fill in the blank, because they have a sexy brand. I mean, when I started out, I did a lot of business in what I call non-sexy industries, such as pest control. I mean, you can't get
Yeah.
less sexy than bed bugs, okay? So I I'm like, you can't, okay? I mean, between I worked with that, I worked with plumbing, okay? I mean, I loved it because they had cash flow and they knew what to do. I couldn't
Sure.
do
Yeah.
this with, like, Morgan Stanley. I didn't go after the sexy companies. I went after non-sexy because I could
Right.
service them better. So you got to know who's your ideal client, who can pay you, and not get caught up in this, like this, oh my God, I'm doing business with corporate 100. No.
Who
No, and I
cares,
want to add
right?
one thing. With talking about cash flow, years ago, I was working with a startup company, and he was funding it out of his pocket. He had sold a previous company, so he was funding the whole thing out of his pocket. And he's starting to have a cash flow crunch. So I came up with a really clever idea to help generate cash. So when I would send out a quote for this was construction management software, and people were, basically the deal was done, it was just sending them the paperwork. I had a little checkbox that I created that basically said 5% off if paid in full with the order. And that was
Right.
it. And it was just a little checkbox that I didn't advertise it. I didn't say a word about it. And I sent it in. Everybody that I sent to checked that box off. And I had an area for a credit card. And they put in their credit card. And this is, talking $5,000-$10,000 worth of software per seat. It was a per license. And people took it because I knew that the CFO of that company would go, hey, 500 bucks is 500 bucks, and I'm doing it. And that generated cash flow because we got money right away. So
Ab-
sometimes you got to,
Right.
come up with a creative little idea that costs you pennies, but can generate very quick cash flow for you.
It's
Always.
crazy.
Totally see
All right,
that.
guys, with that in mind, let's wind down. With that in, let's do this. Let's do our takeaways, going back to Sean's time when he was with us. Freddie, what's your takeaway from today?
Definitely making sure that you have somebody else take a look at your books and making sure that they're organized properly, categorized properly, so that you know where you're going, because at the end of the day, that's your compass.
Rochelle.
I'm big on profit, not revenue. Let's look at, are you
I
actually making
love
money?
it.
Don't get caught up on these sexy numbers or these sexy brands. I want meat and potatoes and profit.
All right. I'm going to mention something that I didn't have a chance to talk about during our show, but I think you need to consider a meeting with your banker once a month. Boom.
Agree with that.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. It's been a great show on finance this time, an entirely different topic compared to what we've talked about in the past. Tune in next week when we have our next show. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Have a good week, everybody.
You got it.